You don't expect your life to change in 3 minutes. Especially not after 20 years of showing up early, double-checking every checklist, and keeping calm when things were on fire, literally and metaphorically. But that's exactly what happened on a drizzly Tuesday morning at the regional headquarters of Sovereign Skies Airlines. My name is Louis Brent, and I'm a pilot. I remember the rain tapping gently against the windshield of my car as I sat in the parking lot, staring at the building I'd walked in every week for 2 decades. I should have known something was off. The meeting invite had come last minute, marked mandatory, with no agenda. In aviation, no agenda is always a bad sign. Inside, the hallways were too quiet. The receptionist didn't look up as I walked past, and the door to conference room B, the one used for pilot briefings and HR interventions, was already open. "Captain Brent," said a voice I didn't recognize. The man who stood up from behind the glass-top table couldn't have been more than 30. Tall, neatly dressed, hairstyled like someone who had a personal assistant, and a face that had never known turbulence. I didn't recognize him, but I recognized his type. "Thanks for coming in. I'm Travis Hale, new VP of Flight Operations." He didn't offer his hand. "Strike one." I nodded politely and sat down, placing my worn pilot logbook on the table. Something of a habit, a symbol, maybe even a shield. I'd flown over 14,000 hours for Sovereign, trained dozens of pilots, helped land a damaged 737 in Denver during a snowstorm, and got a plaque in the hallway for it. 20 years of service, and I was proud of every flight. Travis tapped his sleek iPad and cleared his throat like he was about to start TED Talk. "I'll keep this brief," he said. "Due to a company-wide cost restructuring initiative, your position as senior captain has been eliminated, effective immediately. Your severance details are in this packet." He slid a folder across the table like it was a coffee bill. I blinked. I thought he was joking at first. Some bad prank initiation from the new guy. But his face didn't change. No eye contact. No apology. Just a clean cut. As if removing a wing from a plane didn't compromise the whole structure. "I've been with Sovereign for 20 years. I said, carefully. "No incidents. No violations. I've mentored. I know your record, Captain," he interrupted, finally glancing at me. "This isn't about performance. It's about restructuring. We're optimizing costs, and frankly, your salary bracket doesn't align with our new projections." Optimizing costs. My blood started to thrum in my ears. "You're grounding me to save money." I said, voice low. He didn't respond. Just tapped the iPad again. I could have fought. I could have stood, slammed my logbook on the table, demanded to speak with someone higher up. But something inside me, maybe dignity, maybe exhaustion, kept me rooted. I nodded once, slowly, then reached for the folder. "I see," I said. I stood. My legs felt heavier than usual. I had faced wind shear at 36,000 feet and kept a plane steady, but right then I couldn't trust my knees. No handshake. No thank you for your service. Just silence as I turned and walked out of the room. I passed the hallway with the pilot plaques. Mine was still there, bronze and proud. Captain Louis Brent, for courage and excellence in flight. I didn't stop to look. As I stepped out onto the wet tarmac behind the hangars, a shortcut I'd taken 1,000 times, I heard the distant roar of engines spooling up. I turned instinctively toward the sound. There she was, Flight 209 to Seattle, my last scheduled flight before they pulled me from the roster. The same Boeing 737 I knew by heart, every creak in the cockpit, every touch point on her frame. And there in the left seat, through the glass, was First Officer Kyle Emerson. No, Captain Emerson now. I trained Kyle myself, saw his first takeoff, helped him through his first night landing. He still called me sir, even though I told him not to. And now, He was wearing 4 stripes on his shoulder, MIC, Fly My Bird. I watched as the plane began its slow taxi to the runway. Lights blinking, engines humming with confidence. She was in good hands, but it didn't stop the hollow ache in my chest. I stood there in the drizzle, hands in my coat pockets, letting the rain hit my face. I thought about my wife, Marlene, waiting at home. She had brewed me a fresh pot of coffee before I left and kissed me twice, saying, "Fly safe, baby." How was I supposed to walk in and tell her I'd been fired? I didn't move until the jet lifted off the runway and vanished into the clouds. My last flight, taking off without me. I finally turned and walked back toward my car. Each step felt like the end of something I hadn't prepared for. Not a crash landing, no. This was something worse. A slow fade, a silent exit. 20 years of perfect records, logbooks full of experience, and all it took was 3 minutes and a man who had never sat in a cockpit. But something inside me whispered, "This isn't how your story ends." I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I wasn't finished flying. Not yet. There's a strange ache that comes not from what you lost, but from how easily it was discarded. That night, after I told Marlene everything, she wrapped me in the same embrace she gave me after my first long-haul solo flight. No words, just warmth. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the sealed envelope Travis Hale had handed me. Severance package, a few weeks' pay, a company email thanking me for my contributions. Contributions, like I'd once handed them a stapler, not 2 decades of my life. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept drifting back. Not to the day I was fired, but to the days I fought to earn that uniform. Before Sovereign Skies, I flew cargo. Old Cessna Caravans, rusty prop birds that smelled like motor oil and midnight. I took whatever routes they gave me. Snowstorms, desert heat, flying into strip-lit runways in the middle of nowhere just to drop off medical supplies or machine parts. I didn't care. I loved the skies. I didn't have a fancy degree. No MBA. Just a dream, grit, and a pilot's license I paid for in sweat and second jobs. Eventually, I got noticed. A hiring manager at Sovereign took a chance on me, then a mid-sized regional airline with ambitions. That first year, I lived out of a suitcase and ate more vending machine dinners than I care to admit. I studied manuals on my off days, volunteered for Red Ice, always said yes when they asked for extra legs. I wasn't just trying to be a good pilot. I wanted to be their best. And for a long time I was. By my 6th year, I was lead captain. A few years later, they tapped me to head the new pilot mentorship program. I trained every new hire from 2008 to 2016. Guys like Kyle, who took off in my seat that day. I remember when Captain Don Riley was CEO. Former Air Force. Firm handshake, sharp eyes, and a deep respect for pilots. He sat in on every annual safety review and even joined cockpit ride-alongs every few months to stay close to the heartbeat, as he put it. He believed in loyalty and always reminded us, passengers don't buy tickets for profit margins. They buy trust. Everything changed when he retired. Enter Gavin Lance, Harvard MBA, boardroom charmer, not a day of flight experience in his life. They brought him in to modernize the company. At first, it was just tech upgrades and internal restructuring. Then the deeper cuts came. Training budgets slashed. Flight simulator hours reduced. Maintenance crew rotations sped up. Pilots complained, but the new management always responded the same way. "We trust your professionalism." What they really meant was, figure it out, and don't cost us money. I saw the cracks forming. On a late-night debrief, one of our newer captains confided in me. He barely had 2 hours of sim time before being cleared for crosswind landings. 2 hours. In my day, you didn't touch a plane without 12. Another time, I noticed a maintenance sign-off that was too neat, too fast. We were supposed to have a full hydraulic check after a rough landing, but someone higher up had marked it unnecessary. I brought it up in the next safety committee meeting. "Lewis," said the new director of ops, smirking, "your standards are admirable, but the industry's evolving. Efficiency is how we survive. Survival comes second if a plane goes down, I shot back, but my words fell like sand through glass. No one looked me in the eye. Later that week, I got a memo reminding me to stay aligned with evolving company objectives. That was their version of a warning. Marlene saw the shift too. I'd come home tense, irritated. She'd find me pacing with logbooks in hand, muttering about checklists, about how we were teaching new hires to shave corners and call it streamlining. "You've given them everything," she said once. "Why does it feel like they're slowly erasing you?" I didn't have an answer then. I do now. They didn't want pilots with backbone. They wanted compliance. Predictable, agreeable, low-cost labor. And I, Captain Louis Brent, the once golden boy, the go-to trainer, the calm voice in every cockpit emergency, had become a liability. All because I believed loyalty still meant something. All because I spoke up. The irony? Every single warning I gave them wasn't for me. It was for them. For the passengers. For the junior pilots trying to do their best in a system that didn't care if they were ready. And when it came time to restructure, they didn't even have the guts to let me go with dignity. Just 3 minutes and a folder. I stayed up until dawn, sitting in my old leather recliner, flipping through my logbooks. Page after page, year after year, notations, weather patterns, emergency maneuvers, routes flown, memories, proof that I didn't just do a job. I lived it. Somewhere around sunrise, Marlene brought me a cup of coffee and sat beside me, quiet. "You thinking about going back?" she asked softly. "I don't know if there's a place for me anymore," I said. "Not in this version of the skies." She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and said, "Then maybe it's time you build a new one." Her words stayed with me long after she went back upstairs, because deep down, I knew something she didn't yet. They fired a pilot, but they also set something in motion they couldn't control. They thought they clipped my wings, but I wasn't falling. I was just circling, and I was about to change altitude. You never realize how closely your identity is tied to your uniform until you're standing outside the terminal with no badge, no access, and nothing but memories. 2 weeks had passed since the firing. I hadn't shaved in 4 days, and the stack of job leads on my desk remained untouched. Marlene kept urging me to take a break, go fishing, visit our daughter in Portland. But something about the way it all ended didn't sit right. It wasn't just how they fired me, it was why. That gnawing didn't go away. Then one morning, I got a message from Darren York, a first officer I trained back in 2014. The text was simple: crew lounge. After 2,200 hours. Discreet. It felt like something out of a spy movie. But I knew Darren. Quiet, steady, not the type for dramatics. I left the house that night without telling Marlene. If she asked, I'd say I was meeting an old friend for coffee, which wasn't entirely untrue. The terminal was quiet at that hour. I had to come in through the staff parking lot. Darren had left a visitor's pass at security. The badge still felt strange clipped to my belt. Ghost-like, like I didn't belong anymore. Inside the crew lounge, the smell of burnt coffee and jet fuel clung to the air like always. It was after hours, so only a few overnight crew shuffled in and out. Darren waved me over to a far booth near the back, half shadowed by a vending machine. To my surprise, it wasn't just him. Monica Ruiz, senior captain. Marcus Chin, one of our best flight engineers. Even Darnell Sanders, who rarely spoke above a whisper, was there. 7 of them in total. They all looked tired, angry, and relieved to see me. We shouldn't be doing this here, Monica said under her breath. But we didn't know who else to trust. I nodded slowly. What's going on? Darren slid a folder across the table. This is why they fired you, Louis. You got too close. Inside were printed logs, maintenance reports, checklists, engineering notes. At first glance, they looked routine, but I'd reviewed thousands of these in my time. Something felt off. Page 6, Marcus said. I turned the page. There it was. A notation for a hydraulic pump issue on a 737 MAX. The initial assessment, done by a senior tech, had flagged it as a Class A issue, critical failure risk. But beside it, another signature had downgraded it to Class C, non-urgent. The signatures didn't match. The override came from upper management. Darnell said, voice tight. Hale's office. We checked the ID trail in the system. I stared at the line. CPT 0032. Hydraulic pressure fluctuation. Original note. Requires immediate inspection before next flight. Overwritten to monitor on next rotation. No delay necessary. That plane flew 4 more legs before being pulled for repair. How many of these have you found? I asked, my voice low. 23. Monica said. And those are just from the past 3 months. They passed me more pages. Pressurization inconsistencies, sensor failures, even one report about unstable flaps on landing. All critical issues, either ignored or logged under downgraded codes to avoid FAA reporting thresholds. We think they're pushing flights through, Darren said, to cut ground time and avoid delays. It's all about turnaround now. And the pilots? I asked, do they know? Monica shook her head. They see the clean logs. By the time they board, the paper trail's already scrubbed. I sat back, heart hammering. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about passengers. About 30,000 feet in the air, trusting us to get them home safe, while a spreadsheet decided whether or not their plane deserved maintenance. Why are you telling me this? I asked. If they find out you met with me. Darren leaned in. Because we know you, Lewis. You were the last one who gave a damn. You stood up and the rest of us kept our heads down. And now someone needs to blow this wide open. They'll bury it, I said. They'll call it a miscommunication or fire a low-level tech. Unless you make it public. That silence hit hard. Because I knew what it meant. I'd be burning bridges, torching what little reputation I still had in aviation. But looking at the folder in front of me, at the faces of people who had once followed my lead in cockpits across the globe, I realized something. This wasn't about reputation. It was about responsibility. They fire me to keep me quiet. And in doing so, they'd handed me the very match that could bring their house of cards crashing down. I closed the folder. Give me everything. Original logs, timestamp data, internal messages, if you can find them. I'll take it from here. Marcus nodded. Already working on it. As I stood to leave, Darren grabbed my arm. One more thing. Check the maintenance record for Flight 742. The last one you were supposed to captain. My breath caught. What? Because Kyle said the plane was vibrating the whole descent into Denver. My plane. The one they pulled me from. It wasn't just a betrayal anymore. It was a close call. I walked out of that lounge knowing one thing for certain. They didn't just fire the wrong man. They underestimated him. And now, I had every reason to fight back. It started with a whisper. A few pilots citing safety discrepancies on pre-flight reports. One captain refused to sign off on an Airbus headed to Chicago. Another grounded a 737 in Dallas for unresolved pressurization variants. They weren't loud. Not first. But they didn't need to be. This safety stand-down, as it came to be called, spread in less than 72 hours. Pilots began invoking FAA Clause 121.533d, their right to refuse a flight due to unresolved safety concerns. I watched it unfold from my home office, glued to my screen as messages poured into the secure group Darren had created. Dozens of crew members, some I hadn't heard from in years, sharing screenshots, flagged logs, cryptic notes. Some still flying, some grounded, all angry. By Friday, Monica Ruiz had turned in her wings. Publicly, she posted her resignation letter on LinkedIn, calling out a corporate culture that values profit over passenger lives. It went viral overnight. Pilots across the industry began tagging it, resharing, adding their own stories. The cracks had become a rupture. And then it happened. Flight 742, the very aircraft I was pulled from, was grounded in Salt Lake City after a severe hydraulic fluid leak was discovered during taxi. The same issue we'd found in the doctored logs. Emergency crews were dispatched. No injuries, but it made the news. CNN's headline was brutal. Pilots raise alarm. Airline safety failures threaten passenger lives. That same evening, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. Mr. Brent, the voice asked. Yes. This is Andrea Hall with the Federal Aviation Administration. We'd like to speak with you regarding some documentation you've provided. I froze. You have it. I asked. We do, and it raises some serious concerns. We're dispatching inspectors to the airline's headquarters immediately. Just like that, everything changed. The following Monday, FAA auditors walked through the airline's doors unannounced. They combed through logs, interviewed crew, pulled aircraft from service. It was all over the news. Even my neighbors started asking questions. Reporters reached out. I turned them down at first. I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted the truth out. But then a name appeared in the press. Mine. Former airline captain fired after raising concerns. Now a key whistleblower in FAA probe. Someone leaked my involvement. Maybe to pressure me. Maybe to silence me. Instead, it did the opposite. I gave one interview. Then another. I spoke calmly. Factually. No drama. Just the truth. I told them what I'd seen. What my colleagues had uncovered. I even read aloud from one of the doctored maintenance logs on live television. That night, stock prices began to slide. By week's end, shareholders were demanding answers. A class action suit was filed on behalf of passengers. And then came the board meeting. Closed door, high stakes. The result? The CEO resigned. Publicly. They tried to frame it as a personal decision to focus on family. But everyone knew the truth. You don't abandon a $4 million salary in the middle of the scandal unless you've been pushed. As the dust settled, I got another call. Not from the FAA. From inside the airline. A woman named Teresa Macklin, senior compliance officer. We'd crossed paths briefly when she was still in legal. Now she was appointed interim operations lead. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said over the phone. But I need your help. I waited. We're rebuilding from scratch. Systems, safety protocols, training structure, everything. The board wants someone with integrity to help us do it. I laughed once bitterly. You fired me. I didn't, she said. He did. And we all saw what happened next. I paused, staring at the framed photo of my final crew flight, still hanging on the wall. You want me to come back? I want you to advise. As a consultant, independent, unfiltered. I didn't answer right away. Part of me still wanted to burn it all down, to let them sit in the ashes. But another part, the pilot in me, knew that real change only happens from within. I'll think about it, I said. That night, Marlene poured me a drink and sat beside me on the porch. The stars were out, and for once, my mind was quiet. You going back? She asked. I'm not sure. She took a sip. You love flying, but you hated what it had become. I nodded. They wanted to help fix it. She looked over at me. Then maybe that's what you were always meant to do. I didn't sleep much that night, but when the sun rose, I made my decision. Not because I wanted my job back, but because people still step onto planes every day, believing they'll land safely. And someone has to make sure they do, even if that someone is the guy they once threw away. I decided not to take up their offer because the rot was too deeply entrenched and the enablers were still in the system. They weren't seriously ready to overhaul the system and wasn't going to be a part of their whitewash. Revenge doesn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it walks in quietly through the front door, wearing a tailored suit, carrying a pilot's logbook, and offering a firm handshake. The call came 2 weeks after the FAA wrapped their investigation. I was standing on my back porch with a coffee in hand, watching the wind ripple through the trees when my phone buzzed. Lewis. It's Ray. I hadn't heard that voice in nearly 6 years. Captain Raymond Whitaker, my old mentor. The man who took a rookie cargo pilot under his wing and taught him how to fly commercial with precision and pride. He'd retired early after the buyout at Skyrise Airways, disgusted by the corporate shift. I've been watching what's happening, he said. You handled it with class. The industry's better because of you. I didn't know what to say. I'm back, he continued. Smaller airline out of Denver. Growing fast. We need leadership. Real leadership. Not managers. Think you're ready to build something the right way. I smiled. Not because I needed the job, but because I believed in the mission. Say when I told him. 3 weeks later, I stepped into the sunlit hangar of Aerovia, a young airline with a clean fleet and clean slate. They had ambition and heart. Ray had taken over as chief operations officer and was building from scratch. Training, standards, culture, and he wanted me to lead it. They handed me a crisp white shirt, a new set of wings, and access to a training department that was mine to rebuild. No red tape, no shortcuts, no compromise. Word spread fast. The first to call was Darren, then Monica, then Leo and Tara, pilots I'd flown with, trained, watched rise through the ranks. Many of them had quietly stayed in contact after the scandal, some still stuck in contracts, others waiting for a sign. I guess I became that sign. By the end of the first month, 17 pilots had joined me at Aerovia. 17, each with thousands of hours in the air, each tired of being treated like a replaceable part. They followed not because I promised them money or titles, but because they trusted me to put safety and integrity first. Back at my former airline, things were different. Internal leaks showed canceled routes, staff shortages, delayed schedules, training gaps, so why they had to rent simulators from competitors. New hires were flying with minimal oversight, passenger confidence plummeting, and still, not a word from me. I didn't write op-eds. I didn't trash them online. I didn't cheer when I saw them drowning. I just kept flying forward. My first flight with Aerovia was a sunrise route from Denver to Seattle. Brand new aircraft, fuel efficient, glass cockpit, next-gen navigation suite. I stood at the foot of the jetway, running my fingers along the silver skin of the fuselage, and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Pride. The co-pilot was younger, nervous, respectful. Called me Captain Brent, even though I told him to use Lewis. "You ever flown this bird before?" he asked as we climbed in. I smiled. "Only in my dreams." He laughed, and we got to work. Pre-flight checks. Systems sync. Final brief. As we taxied out, I caught my reflection in the cockpit window. Older, sure, but calm. Steady. Alive. At 32,000 feet, above the snow-capped Rockies, I let the silence settle in. No drama. No noise. Just the hum of engines and the quiet dignity of doing something right. Back at my former airline, chaos was still unfolding. I'd heard through the grapevine they were offering retention bonuses to anyone who stayed. Desperation wrapped in dollar signs. They thought I'd be bitter, but I wasn't. I had moved on. The final shot, the moment that will forever live rent-free in my memory, came during a press conference streamed live across the industry. Aerovia had just secured new international routes. Ray stood at the podium, flanked by leadership. Then he motioned to the side, and someone handed him a pair of polished wings. "These," he said, "belong to the man who helped restore what flying was always meant to be." He turned to me and pinned the wings on my chest. Captain Lewis Brent, Director of Flight Standards and Safety. Cameras flashed. Applause rose. And somewhere in the headquarters of the airline that once tossed me aside like scrap metal, they were watching. I didn't need revenge, because I'd already won. They thought they could replace me with a spreadsheet. But in aviation, experience isn't just about numbers. It's about trust. And once that's gone, so are your wings. Here are some questions for you, our viewers. If you were Lewis, would you have taken revenge or walked away quietly? Do you think experience is undervalued in today's corporate world? Have you ever been betrayed by a company you gave everything to? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell because we have more stories coming up just for you.